is Hawkins, and I want to continue telling you information about independent clauses, commas with independent clauses, and in order to do that I have to teach you the difference between one independent clause and two independent clauses. So I have a couple of sentences on the board here today. The first sentence is several brushes were inside the barn. In order to determine whether you have an independent clause or not, you have to figure out how many subject-predicate sets you have. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to identify our nouns and our verbs so that we can figure out how many subject-predicate sets we have. First one is brushes, and then we also have barn as a noun. Out of those two, those are the only two nouns that we have, and we're also looking for pronouns. We don't have any pronouns in that sentence. So out of those two, which one do you think is our subject? Obviously, it's going to have to be brushes. That's what the sentence is about. So here's our subject. Then we also have to look for our verbs. The only word in this sentence that is a verb is were. And verbs are always our predicate. So we only have one subject-predicate set. So that means we have one independent clause. It makes sense all on its own. Several brushes were inside the barn. So that's all we have. Notice we don't have any commas. The only punctuation we have is a period at the end. The next sentence, Nicole brushed Rowdy's mane and then she cleaned his hose. So first we have to identify our nouns and then we'll identify our verbs. So Nicole is a noun. It's a proper noun. Rowdy is a noun, but notice it has an apostrophe S here. It's showing possession, so it's actually acting like an adjective here. That means that mane is a noun. And then we have she is a pronoun, and hooves is a noun. So out of those nouns and pronouns, we have to determine which one is our subject. So Nicole is the subject of this sentence. Mane is acting like something else, and I'll get to that in a second. Over here, then she cleaned his hooves. Hooves is not the subject of the sentence. Actually, she is. She's the one doing the action. So she is the subject. So now we have to determine which ones are our verbs. So brushed is the action. That makes that the predicate. Okay, and then as we go down the sentence, the only other thing that could be a verb is cleaned. So that's a verb, which makes it the predicate over here. So now we can see very clearly that this has two subject-predicate sets. Nicole brushed and she cleaned. So we have two subject-predicate sets. That means we have at least two clauses. Can they each stand alone? Yes. Nicole brushed Rowdy's mane can stand alone. Then she cleaned his hooves. That can stand alone. So we have two independent clauses. Notice that we have punctuated that exactly how I taught you in the last video. We have a comma here right before the coordinating conjunction and. Okay, one other thing I wanted to tell you about too is what these other nouns are doing. And when we have an action verb like brushed, we are assuming that there's a direct object. And the way we find that out is Nicole brushed what? Rowdy's mane. So mane is actually our direct object here. And same with the other side. Then she cleaned what? His hooves. So this noun is also a direct object. So we have two independent clauses here. It is connected with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and so that one is fine as is. Now this one gets a little tricky. These two sentences are declarative sentences. It's easy to find our subject predicate. It's in a normal syntax. But when you have an interrogative sentence like this, it's asking a question, is that a new saddle or is it one of the older ones? You have to do a little switching around to figure out where the subject is. So instead of saying, is that a new saddle, we would say, that is a new saddle. So then that helps us determine, first, that that is acting like a pronoun here. It is our subject. Is our verb. It's a linking verb. It's our predicate. And it is linking that to saddle. So that is our subject complement. Okay, that's also a noun. Over here we have the same thing. Is it one of the older ones? And we would turn it around. It is one of the older ones to find out where our subject is. So this pronoun is also the subject. And the is here is our verb and our predicate. And it is doing the same thing. It is connecting it to older ones. So it is telling us what our subject complement is. And we always go with this one right before the prepositional phrase. So this pronoun is our subject complement. Okay? So we have two independent clauses again. Is that a new saddle? Can stand alone. Is it one of the older ones? Can stand alone. Once again, we have a coordinating conjunction or, and it is connected with this comma. So you can see that that is once again, 2 independent clauses, even though it is an interrogative sentence. Down here, now this is where it gets tricky. A lot of my students will want to put commas everywhere in this sentence because they're not quite sure what to do with it. But notice there's only one. And this comes right after a prepositional phrase that is an introductory element. So in the prepositional phrase, we cannot find our subject. In is a preposition, pasture is the object of the preposition. So we start over here. A horse and her foal grazed quietly and watched Rowdy. So our subject here is horse. And where a lot of my students get confused is not realizing that we actually have a compound subject here, because foal is the other one. Okay, so both of these are nouns, and this makes it a compound subject. Now we have to look for the predicate of this compound subject, horse and foal. And so then we look over here, and we see grazed. That is a verb. And then we continue on. Quietly is just an adverb modifying grazed. And is a coordinating conjunction. This time it's connecting another verb. So watched is our verb. It's also our predicate. So we have the same situation here. We have a compound subject, but we also have a compound predicate here. So here, even though we have 2 subjects and 2 predicates, we still only have 1 subject-predicate set. So this, even though it has 2 subjects, 2 predicates, it's still just 1 independent clause. So we don't put a comma between this and, horse and, we don't put a comma between quietly and, because it's just 1 independent clause. Unlike here, where we have an independent clause here and an independent clause here, because we have 2 subject-predicate sets that way, and here where we have an independent clause and an independent clause. So in this case, the only comma that's needed is after this introductory prepositional phrase. So that's our lesson for today. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. The first sentence, you have to so the first one, brushes, is a noun. Yeah, come again. So we have to now identify our subjects, or identify our nouns. Wait. So that right there is the topic of it.